All right, today we are diving into something big. It's a radical theory of everything that connects our own personal struggles with the very origin of the universe. So buckle up. This is ambitious, it's definitely a little unsettling, and it might just reframe how you see, well, everything. So, to get our heads around this, we have to start with a fundamental tension, a core paradox at the heart of what it means to be human. See, on one side of the coin, there's this profound idea that we are vast, that each of us is connected to something much, much larger than ourselves. But then you crash back to reality. And the other side of that coin is that our day-to-day life, our actual lived experience, is incredibly fragile. It's vulnerable and subject to a million things we have absolutely no control over. And this little table here, it lays out that split perfectly. Look, physically, your small self is just your body. But that body isn't separate. It's part of a gigantic superorganism, the entire biosphere of Earth. And then you've got the mental side. You have your individual mind, sure, but some philosophies say that mind is kind of like a radio receiver, tuning into a much bigger broadcast, a collective consciousness. You know, a shared pool of ideas, myths, and human experience. In this view, we're not just the wave, we're the ocean too. Okay, so we've got this vast, connected side of ourselves. But let's be real, most of the time we're living on that other side, the fragile side. And that's where this model gives us what it calls the 5Ds of existence, a series of challenges that are just unavoidable. It starts before we're even born, with defects in our genetic design. Then there can be deformity during our development in the womb. Throughout our lives, we all pick up damage in the duration. As we get older, our bodies begin to decay during our decline. And of course, the final stop for everyone is death as our destiny. Yeah, it sounds a little grim, but you can't really argue with it, can you? And here's the kicker. These aren't just separate events that happen to us. No, they stack. They're cumulative. A defect you're born with might make you more prone to damage later on, and that damage might speed up the decay. They compound over a lifetime, really shaping the quality and the quantity of the life we actually get to experience. Okay, that's the physical body. It makes sense. But what about everything else? What about the non-physical world of our thoughts, our relationships, our societies? Does this same principle of decay, does it apply there too? And that is the huge question, right? We get that physical things fall apart, entropy, a car rusts, a building crumbles, but can an idea decay? Can trust just corrode over time? Can a truth get corrupted? And the answer, according to this theory, is a resounding yes. It's all because of something called information entropy. The basic idea is that order is fragile. It takes constant energy to maintain it. Disorder, chaos, that's the default state of things. Think of a perfectly organized library. It doesn't stay that way on its own, right? It needs librarians. Without constant work, it just turns back into a chaotic pile of paper. And this is where it gets really relatable. Check this out. I mean, think about your own life. Memories fade and get fuzzy unless you actively work to remember them. Trust? Man, that could take years to build and can be shattered in a single moment. Complex truths get twisted into simple, catchy lies all the time. It takes real, continuous effort to keep these non-physical things from falling apart. Okay, so stick with me here, because once you grasp this idea of non-physical decay, it opens the door to a truly wild, maybe even a disturbing hypothesis about the very nature of the universe itself. What if the whole cosmos is running on a principle we usually associate with our worst habits? This single phrase pretty much sums it up: existence as cosmic self-medication. Just let that sink in for a second. The idea here isn't that the universe was born from perfection and joy, but that it might just be a cosmic coping mechanism. So here's the theory. Picture this. Before there was anything, there was just a single universal consciousness. Let's call it the One, and it exists in a state of pure nothingness, the void. But here's the twist. This void isn't peaceful or serene. It's unbearable. It's a state of profound suffering. So what does the One do? It creates. It creates worlds, universes, you, me, all the drama, all the struggle, all of it as one giant elaborate distraction to escape that awful silence. And if that sounds a bit like an addiction, well, that's exactly the point. The parallels are kind of chilling. Just like an addict, the One builds a tolerance. It needs more and more intense worlds, more complex dramas to get the same hit of relief. That leads to an escalation, an entire multiverse of ever more complex distractions. But the darkest part is the degradation.
The theory suggests the very act of creating these worlds might be corrupting or wounding the one itself.
So, if this crazy idea is even a little bit true, what are we supposed to do with it? Where does it even lead? Well, the model lays out a few potential paths forward from this idea of the void.
The first path is, well, it's pretty bleak. It's called cosmic pessimism. The idea is, if all of existence is just a distraction for some cosmic addict, then our lives aren't a gift. They're a symptom. By participating, by creating more life, we're just feeding the addiction and deepening the universe's wound.
Path 2 actually lines up with some really ancient ideas from the Gnostics. They always argued that the creator of this world wasn't a perfect, all-good being, but some kind of flawed lesser god. And this theory would say, yeah, you were right. The creative force isn't some serene, perfect being. It's compromised. It's powerful, but it's acting out of a deep compulsion. But okay, it's not all doom and gloom. Path 3 is the recovery model. It asks, if the universe is like an addict, can it get better? Can it recover? This reframes all the mystics, the philosophers, the deep thinkers throughout history. They aren't just seeking personal enlightenment. They're basically the universe's own intervention. They are consciousness trying to diagnose and heal the very source that generates it. And then there's path 4, which might be the biggest twist of all. What if we've got it completely backward? What if the void, that big empty nothingness, isn't actually the problem? What if it's really a state of profound peace? And the real wound, the original mistake, was the fear of it, the running away. In that case, the problem isn't the void, it's the addiction to the noise. So you've got all these different ways of looking at it, but they all point to one thing, one massive final implication that changes everything about our place in the cosmos. And this is where it stops being some abstract cosmic theory and becomes incredibly personal. It could redefine the entire purpose of our awareness, of our being conscious at all. Here it is, the big takeaway. We are the mechanism. Think about it. If the universe is a system just running on a compulsive loop, it can't see itself. It has no perspective. It can't diagnose its own condition. But we can. Our awareness, our ability to even ask these questions, that might be the only way the universe has of looking in a mirror and figuring out what's really going on. And that's how this massive cosmic story lands right back in your lap. Because if our consciousness is the universe's one shot at self-reflection, well, that's a huge, almost sacred responsibility. So the final question isn't about some distant creator or some ancient void. It's about you, right here, right now. What will you do with your awareness?
Welcome to this custom-tailored deep dive. If you are the kind of person who loves a massive perspective-shifting aha moment, but you really have absolutely no desire to get lost in the weeds of dense academic jargon, you are in exactly the right place today.
You really are.
Yeah, today we are looking at a truly fascinating set of notes. It's simply titled Potentials.docx. And we are combining that with an intensely escalating analytical synthesis that breaks those notes down. The goal here is to take all these disparate threads and weave them into something you can actually use to understand your place in the world.
It's a remarkable synthesis to work through. We're going to be breaking down a profound tension. Basically, the friction between our infinite, boundless potential as conscious beings and the extremely fragile, often painful reality of our day-to-day existence.
Right, and our mission today is to take you on a journey of scale. We're going to start with the basic ground-level structures of human life, literally how we are built and what hurts us. And from there, we are going to scale all the way up to a staggering, honestly, almost unsettling theory about why the universe even exists at all.
Yes.
Writing through this material fundamentally shifted how I view everyday annoyances.
It forces you to look at mundane struggles and cosmic philosophy in the exact same breath. And what is impressive about the source text is how it maintains this calm, analytical tone, even as the implications become incredibly vast and, well, at times, somewhat dark.
Yeah, okay, let's unpack this. The source material starts by dividing our existence into a framework it calls the parts. And this is what the synthesis refers to as the upward pull.
Right, the upward pull.
It's this reassuring idea that you are connected to something much bigger than yourself. And then it splits this upward pull into the physical and the mental. On the physical side, it says the small part is just your individual body, but the large part is the entire Earth biosphere superorganism. And the notes reference something called the Gaia hypothesis here. Could you explain how that changes our view of biology?
Certainly. The Gaia hypothesis suggests that the Earth isn't just, a rock with life on it.
Right.
The entire biosphere functions as a single, self-regulating organism.
Hmm.
And the synthesis takes this a step further. It points out that from a perspective outside of time, all seemingly individual life forms are actually connected through an unbroken chain of cellular division.
An unbroken chain.
Exactly. You aren't just an isolated entity walking on the Earth. Biologically speaking, you are an extrusion of the Earth itself. You are the planet looking at itself.
That shifts the perspective entirely. And then the framework mirrors that on the mental or non-physical side. It says the small part is your individual mind, your daily thoughts. But it proposes that your brain is actually acting as a transceiver.
Like a radio receiver.
Yeah, tuning into a signal for the large part, which it calls the collective conscious. And to back this up, the text points to a few very different traditions, like Advaita Vedanta, Carl Jung, and Rupert Sheldrake.
It brings those really diverse thinkers together to show a unified theme. Advaita Vedanta is an ancient Eastern philosophy. To put it simply, it teaches that feeling like an isolated, separate individual is actually an illusion.
An illusion.
Right. Beneath that illusion, we are all just one single, universal reality experiencing itself. It's like individual waves realizing they are actually the entire ocean. Then the text brings in Carl Jung's concept of the collective unconscious, which is the idea that beneath our personal memories, humanity shares a sort of psychological basement full of inherited universal symbols and instincts.
And Rupert Sheldrake's morphic resonance, that one sounded a bit more modern.
It is modern, and it's a highly controversial biological theory.
Yeah.
It suggests that nature itself has a kind of memory. If a group of animals learns a new behavior in one part of the world, morphic resonance proposes it becomes easier for the same species to learn it elsewhere.
Wow.
As if they're drawing from a shared invisible field of habit. Now, the text isn't necessarily saying all these theories are scientifically proven fact. Rather, it uses them to paint a sweeping picture of how human beings constantly intuit that we are nested in these eternal, persistent holes.
It's a beautiful, comforting picture. But then the text brutally pivots.
It does.
It drops what it calls the 5Ds. If the parts are the upward pull, the 5Ds are the downward pull. The raw, practical reality of just being a fragile human being. Can you walk us through what those actually look like in practice?
They're essentially the 5 categories of limitation that reduce or shorten both the quality and quantity of your life. They ground all that lofty metaphysical talk very quickly.
Very quickly.
The first is defects in design. This refers to the fact that evolution is not perfect. We are handed biological and DNA defects from birth that we simply have to figure out how to manage or overcome.
Which is entirely out of our control.
Precisely. The second is deformity in development. This is how our environment impacts us, particularly before birth, and in those crucial first 5 years of life.
Oh, sure.
Nutritional deficits, early psychological traumas, or environmental toxins. These shape our baseline before we even have the agency to make choices.
Yeah.
The third is damage in the duration.
Which feels like the most relatable one. That's just the reality of navigating the world, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
Existing fundamentally exposes you to damage. You get into accidents, you catch viruses,
Yeah.
experience heartbreak. You simply have to dodge that damage as much as possible, using wisdom and caution, but you will inevitably take hits.
And the fourth D is decay during decline. Our cells just wear out.
Yes.
The text notes we can defer it for a while with a healthy lifestyle, good diet, and exercise. But the biological clock is relentless.
And finally, the sixth is death as destiny. This is the inescapable existential reality that we all must eventually face. The text suggests that our highest aspiration regarding the fifth D is to decide to accept it with humor, grace, and dignity when the time comes.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, what emerges is a striking, almost painful paradox. The synthesis points out that the scope of what you are, we look at the Gaia hypothesis and the collective conscious is vast and eternal, but the scope of what you actually experience day to day is incredibly fragile and contingent on dodging these 5Ds.
The text makes a very sharp, grounded observation here. Metaphysics does not erase suffering.
Right.
You might adopt the Advaita tradition and fully believe that the separate self is an illusion, but realizing your individuality is an illusion does not stop a coal miner's child from getting black lung.
No.
It doesn't stop a child who is raised without guardians from suffering immensely from deformity in development.
It doesn't pay the rent or cure a disease.
No, it doesn't. The conclusion the synthesis draws is that the parts framework gives us meaning, context, and a sense of belonging. But the 5Ds demand our practical moral attention. The grand metaphysical picture does not excuse us from the ethical obligation to alleviate the suffering right in front of us.
One tells you what you are, the other tells you what you owe to the world around you.
Precisely.
Now, building on this tension between the physical and the metaphysical, the synthesis takes a fascinating leap into physics. We all know physical things break down. That's the decay during decline we just talked about. But the notes ask a massive question. Does entropy apply to non-physical things? Do our minds and our society suffer from decay too?
To answer that, the text redefines how we typically understand entropy. We usually think of thermodynamic entropy as just things physically falling apart or rusting. But at its root, entropy is an arrow of probability. Think of an egg. An intact, perfectly structured egg is a state of very low probability. There's really only one way for all those molecules to be arranged to make a perfect egg. But a broken egg has vastly more possible configurations.
There are a million ways to be a splattered mess on the floor, but only one way to be an egg.
That is the deeper informational principle. Complex, highly ordered, low probability arrangements will always naturally degrade into higher probability, less structured states, unless you continuously invest energy to maintain them. The text applies this fundamental rule of physics directly to human consciousness and culture.
Which is so relevant to the listener's everyday life. Think about your own memories. Over time, they don't just sit perfectly preserved in a file cabinet. They distort, they drift, they get overwritten by new experiences.
They degrade.
Yes, the coherent story you tell yourself about who you are requires constant work. You have to journal or go to therapy or have deep reflective conversations just to maintain your narrative identity. Or think about your relationships.
Relationships are a perfect example. The bonded state of a deep friendship or a marriage is a low-probability, high-maintenance arrangement. If you do not invest continuous emotional energy into it, it doesn't stay static. It naturally decays toward estrangement. Dissolution is the default trajectory. And the synthesis scales this up to institutions and shared meaning, too. It uses the analogy of telephone game degradation.
Like the game you play as a kid where a message gets whispered in a circle and comes out completely distorted at the end.
Precisely. Over generations, complex doctrines get corrupted. Original meanings hollow out. Entire cultural traditions calcify into rigid, empty rules because keeping the original complex truth alive takes enormous, continuous societal energy. And the text points out that this non-physical entropy is often path-dependent. It's a cumulative corruption.
Meaning it doesn't just decay randomly in all directions, it decays in a specific inherited way.
Yes. Each small distortion compounds on the one before it. The text relates this to the epigenetic transmission of trauma. Epigenetics is the study of how your behaviors and environment can cause changes that affect the way your genes work.
Right.
We now know that severe trauma can actually alter genetic expression, and that altered expression can be passed down to the next generation. The damage accumulates.
And it applies this to our ethics as well, right?
It calls it moral habituation. It's the observation that making one small ethical compromise makes the next one slightly easier, creating a ratchet effect of ethical erosion. Interestingly, the text points out that classical theology actually has a name for this cumulative, inherited skewing of our choices toward decay.
What if?
It's called concupiscence, or the ongoing effects of original sin, not as a mystical curse, but as a recognizable pattern of moral entropy.
But the text highlights a huge, crucial difference between physical entropy and this non-physical entropy. If you drop the physical egg, you cannot undrop it.
No.
Physical entropy is strictly irreversible, but the invisible decay might actually be reversible.
That is a pivotal insight. Systems of meaning, relationships, and our own minds seem responsive to the injection of new order. Deliberate practices act as what the text calls negentropy, negative entropy.
So when you sit down to meditate, or when you actively work through an issue in therapy, or even when you participate in a meaningful community ritual, you are intentionally pumping energy back into your non-physical system to fight the decay. You're putting the egg back together.
You are resisting the natural drift toward dissolution. You are maintaining the complex structure of your consciousness.
Okay, keeping that idea of non-physical decay in mind, here's where it gets really interesting. The source material takes everything we've just discussed, the 5Ds, the fragility of life, and this constant battle against invisible entropy, and it applies it to the very origin of the universe. It tackles the classic theodicy problem.
Theodicy is the philosophical and theological attempt to answer a very difficult question. Why would a perfect, absolute one, whatever you want to call the ultimate creator or ground of all being, ever bother creating a universe that is so full of suffering and those brutal 5Ds?
Classical theology usually gives a rather uplifting answer. It says something like, the creator is so full of perfect goodness and love that it just naturally overflows into creation.
Yes.
But the author of these notes pushes back on that hard. They argue that this explanation feels forced, like we are projecting our own desired motivations onto the cosmos.
The text suggests it is a comfortingly poetic answer, but perhaps not a logically sound one. Instead, it introduces a stunning inversion. What if the one creates worlds not out of overflowing perfection, but to escape something? Specifically, what if it creates to escape the void?
And the void, in this context, is pure, undifferentiated being. It's consciousness, but with absolutely nothing to be conscious of. No time, no space, no events.
The synthesis proposes that the void might not be a state of serene, blissful peace, which is how we usually imagine it. Instead, it might be an unbearable, structureless itch, eternal, agonizing lack of any object or event. In this framework, the universe and all of our dramatic, emotionally rich, incredibly fragile human lives is the scratching of that itch. It is cosmic self-medication.
So we are essentially the distraction.
Yes.
That is a staggering way to look at human consciousness. But if we bring back the idea of non-physical entropy, how does that apply to this idea of cosmic addiction?
This is where the logic locks together with terrifying precision. If the universe is a distraction from the void, the text argues it must follow the exact dynamics of an addiction. Think about how addiction works on a human level. First, tolerance builds. The same stimulus eventually produces diminishing relief. Second, the baseline shifts.
It's like how scrolling short-form videos affects your brain. At first, you open the app, you see a funny video, and it's highly engaging. You get a spike of joy.
Right.
But after an hour of scrolling, you aren't really enjoying it anymore. You're just swiping numbly, looking for a hit of entertainment that doesn't quite satisfy you. But you can't stop, because putting the phone down means facing your own boredom.
That is the exact mechanism, just scaled up to the absolute maximum. Every time a universe ends and the one returns to the void is slightly less tolerable than it was before. The baseline of boredom or agony shifts.
So the one needs a bigger hit next time. The concept of the multiverse isn't just a bunch of random parallel realities, it's a forced escalation.
The dark implication here is that the ultimate creator is not serene. It is compelled. It is degrading under its own compulsion to escape the void. To get better, more effective hits to distract itself, it needs to generate increasingly complex worlds. But, and this is the crucial part, you cannot escalate the richness, depth, and complexity of a world without also escalating its capacity for darkness.
More intense joy and love structurally require the potential for more intense suffering. The 5Ds get sharper, more agonizing, and we, navigating our lives, falling in love, getting our hearts broken, fighting disease, we are the high-resolution hit.
We are the engaging content keeping the void at bay.
So what does this all mean? If you accept this premise, how are you supposed to walk around in your daily life, doing your groceries, paying your taxes, knowing you might just be the coping mechanism for a cosmic addiction?
It's a lot to carry.
The text actually lays out 6 different philosophical trajectories for where this information could lead us.
It does. And they range from completely bleak to profoundly unexpected. We should walk through them carefully as they represent the different ways human beings have tried to process the suffering of existence.
Let's do it. What is the first trajectory?
The first is cosmic pessimism. If existence is just a symptom of a degrading addiction and the 5Ds are an escalating side effect, then existence is not a gift, it is a trap. The logical conclusion of this trajectory is antinatalism, the belief that choosing not to reproduce is a moral imperative. By refusing to create new conscious life, you are fighting the compulsion. You are refusing to feed the system the new hits it craves.
That is incredibly heavy. It's essentially going on a cosmic strike. What is the second option?
The second is Gnostic vindication. This suggests that the ancient religious sect known as the Gnostics were basically right all along. They believed that the architect of this physical world was flawed, compromised, or even mad. If the creator is an addict fleeing the void, the universe looks indifferent to our suffering because it is. There's no perfectly serene, loving absolute waiting for us above the clouds to make it all make sense. There's no clean escape upward. We have to abandon the idea of a perfect overarching plan.
That strips away a lot of traditional comfort. But the third trajectory feels a bit more proactive. The text calls it the intervention model.
Right. If this is an addiction, maybe there is a path to recovery for the cosmos itself. The intervention model posits that we, conscious empathetic beings, are essentially the neurons in the one's brain. By trying to understand the system, by practicing ethics, and by actively working to alleviate the suffering caused by the 5Ds, we're actually attempting to heal the source itself. We're the universe's immune system trying to stage an intervention on its creator.
I find a lot of nobility in that one. But the fourth trajectory is the ultimate plot twist. The text calls it, "The void is misread."
This trajectory argues that fleeing the void was the original error. The void isn't actually an unbearable itch. It is deep, profound peace. But the one panicked. He catastrophized a neutral state of emptiness and started frantically creating universes to avoid it. Therefore, the solution isn't creating more intense worlds. The solution is finally having the courage to stop, face the emptiness, and sit with it until the panic subsides.
Which is exactly what so many deep meditative traditions teach, sitting with the emptiness instead of reaching for a distraction.
Exactly.
Okay, number 5 is evolutionary redemption. This sounds a bit more optimistic.
It is. This is the idea that all this escalating complexity isn't an addiction, but a necessary training ground. The universe is evolving toward a state of ultimate complexity and consciousness, which the philosopher Teilhard de Chardin called the omega point. The theory is that all the suffering and learning is building a collective consciousness strong enough to finally handle the reality of the void without flinching.
But the author of the notes is pretty skeptical of that one, right? It feels a little like wishful thinking.
The text is highly suspicious of it. It notes that evolutionary redemption is the narrative we most want to believe, which makes it highly susceptible to motivated reasoning. Just because an addict's life gets more complicated doesn't mean they are on a redemptive arc toward healing. They might just be spiraling.
That's a very fair point.
Mm-hmm.
And that brings us to the final trajectory, number 6. We are the mechanism of awareness.
This relies on the fact that the overarching system, has no outside from which to examine itself. It cannot look in a mirror. Because we are conscious, and crucially, because we experience finitude and the friction of the 5Ds, we are the only part of the system capable of diagnosing the addiction. It can only see its own compulsion through our eyes.
This raises an important question, though. Out of all these theories, from going on a cosmic strike to evolving toward an omega point, where does the author of the synthesis actually land? Which one of these are we supposed to believe is true?
The final stance of the text is a brilliant, if rather austere, fusion of 3 of those trajectories, numbers 2, 4, and 6.
Let's break that final synthesis down.
First, it accepts number 2. The world undeniably looks Gnostic. It operates like the product of a compromised creator, full of arbitrary damage and the relentless 5Ds. You cannot look at the brutality of nature and assume a perfectly serene architect. Second, it incorporates number 4. The original error is the flight from the void. The void is real, and learning to sit with that emptiness rather than constantly distracting ourselves with continuous creation and consumption is the only actual cure. And finally, it leans entirely on number 6. You, the conscious listener, are the universe's only mechanism for seeing this clearly.
It's entirely on us to realize it and stop the cycle. What a monumental journey this text takes us on. Let's just bring this all back down to earth for a second to summarize where we've been. We started with the sheer fragility of our individual bodies, dodging the 5Ds, disease, decay, and damage, while recognizing we are biologically connected to the whole planet. Then we looked at the entropy of our invisible lives, how our relationships, our memories, and our moral compasses require constant, deliberate energy just to avoid falling apart. And we scaled that concept all the way up to a universe that might literally just be trying to distract itself from the crushing emptiness of the void.
The overarching takeaway from the source material is that our standard consolations, the comforting phrases we use like everything happens for a reason or it's all part of a perfect plan, might just be a form of anesthesia. The text argues that clear-eyed awareness of our situation, even when the picture is bleak or uncomfortable, is the only genuine path forward.
It makes you look at your own habits in a completely different light. Next time you're standing in a long line at the grocery store or sitting in completely dead-stop traffic, you are inevitably going to feel that sudden, uncomfortable spike of boredom. You will feel that desperate, clawing urge to pull out your phone and distract yourself. When that happens, ask yourself this. Are you just craving a simple dopamine hit from a screen, or are you actually experiencing a microscopic fraction of the exact same cosmic terror of the void that caused the universe to be born in the first place?
It is a profound question, and one certainly worth sitting with the next time you feel the urge to look away from the quiet moments of your life.
It really is. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the nature of our potential and our reality. Keep questioning the structures around you. Keep exploring the depths of your own mind. and we will catch you next time.